Alright guys, we're going to try to do something a little different here. You are given a graph. Obviously this is a cubic and this has gone under some type of transformation. What we're going to attempt to do, based on these points, we want to write our functions equation. So what I like to do before we get into these steps over here, what I like to do is graph my original points. Okay, so I'm going to graph 0, 0 was one of my originals. And then we had 1, 1. And then we had -1, -1. Okay, and I'm going to graph this with a very light red just because I don't want to overtake the entire graph because it will get a little confusing. Okay, so this is going to help us in a little bit. The next thing I want to make sure we understand is this idea. Our equation should be in this format. It should be, oops, get this right. A times 1 over b times x minus h, because it's a cubic, we have a power of 3, and then we're going to add a k at the end. So in essence, what we're trying to figure out is we want to figure out our a value, our b value, our h value, and our k value. Once we can figure out these values, we simply plug them in to these spots here. Okay? So how do we do that? The first step is pretty simple. If you look on these steps, we already know our 3 points. They're identified here. We want to use the middle point. In this case, it's -2, 0. And our middle point will give us our h and k. Okay? So h and k come from the middle point. So I'm going to take these values and I'm going to plug them in for my h and k. Okay, careful with your signs here, so watch. My h is now going to be this. We don't know our a yet, we don't know our b. X minus because of the original sign, but my h is labeled as -2, parentheses, power of 3, and then my k is 0. Okay, so again, just leave it like this. Our next step, we found our h and our k. Our next step is to find our a and b. So if you look, to find our a and b, in step 3 it says we're going to look at the difference between the x and y value to identify the a and b. Remember, the change in x value is actually going to give us our b. The change in y value is going to give us our a. So watch how I attempt to do this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this dot back to my original spot, which means I have to move it backwards twice. Okay, let's put this in a different color. So to move my original or my new dot back to its original dot, we have to jump backwards twice. Okay? But if I move this guy back, I have to move my other dots in the same way. So I'm going to jump backwards twice for all my other dots. Okay? So let's do that. And we'll put this movement in blue. So moving this back twice, we get a dot here, which is now, and I'll put this in blue, 0, 0. Moving this guy back twice, we get a dot here, and this new dot, I'm going to erase this. My new dot is going to be -1, 1. Okay, let's move this guy back twice, and this dot is going to go, let's erase this real quick, is going to go here, and that's going to give me -1, -1. Okay? So to be a little less confusing, I'm going to erase my graph. So my original graph. Alright? So bear with me. So we kind of want to ignore this graph for now. All right. So now what we have is our red point. This is the parent point, our original reference point, and we're going to compare it to our new point. So these points should match up. Okay, and these points should match up. All right. So what we want to figure out is, how come these points are not matching up? That means since they don't match up with our original red points, that means our A value or B value has changed. So what I'm going to do is try to figure out this here. I want to look at my X values, because my X values are actually going to determine my B value. And that's what it states over here. Okay? Your X value will identify your B value. Your Y value will identify your A value. So we're going to compare our X's together. And this comparison is our B value. So what we're going to ask ourselves is, what did our original point X, what do we have to multiply it by in order to get -1? Okay, so what do we have to multiply 1 by to get -1? And if we can figure that out, we have just found our B. And if you look, in order to get 1 to turn into -1, we had to multiply by -1. So that means our B is going to equal -1. So now that I know my B is equal to -1, because we compared the X's, how did my red dot get multiplied to change into my blue dot? Only looking at the X's, we now know our B is -1, so I'm going to plug in -1 for that B. Okay, I'll put it in red so you can see I plugged it in. And now I have to just figure out my A. So I'm going to use the same dot. And now I'm going to look at my Y's. Again, we're comparing the same dot. And I ask myself the same question. How did I multiply my original Y to get my new Y? And whatever that number is that I multiplied will give me my A value. So if you look, my original Y was 1. I multiplied it by something and got 1. So the only thing that 1 can be multiplied by to get 1 is actually 1. So my A value is going to be 1. Okay, and now once we have this, we want to clean it up. We have our A, B, H, and K, so I'm going to rewrite this thing. It's going to be f of x equal to 1 parentheses 1 divided by -1 is -1 x negative times a -2, that's +2 parentheses third power, and then x is, or k is 0. I don't need to write it. This would be my final equation.